All right, good evening, and thank you for attending. We'll give folks just a few minutes to filter in. This is the RCPA Climate Protection Initiative public meeting.
Muy buenas noches. Vamos a dar unos minutos para que todos se integren a la reunión. Esta es la reunión de la Autoridad de Transporte del Condado de Sonoma.
And we'll do one more Spanish announcement on how to access that as soon as we get a few more folks.
Ross, could you bring in Chair Rogers?
I got it.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, BC. All right, Julie, would you like to make the Spanish announcement? We'll start the interpretation.
Sure. Muy buenas noches. Bienvenidos a la reunión acerca de la iniciativa de protección climática. Esta reunión será interpretada al español simultáneamente. Si le gustaría escuchar en español, por favor haga clic cuando aparezca el icono del globo al pie de la página y elija su idioma español. Back to you, Ross.
Thank you very much. All right, so good evening, and thank you for attending the RCPA Climate Protection Initiative public meeting. We'd like to call the meeting to order and just briefly address a few logistical details before we begin. The Q&A feature is enabled for this meeting, and we will try to answer submitted questions at the end if time allows. However, the questions will be saved and RCPA staff will provide responses after the meeting, probably via email as necessary. During the presentation, I do encourage you to enable side-by-side mode under view options to get a good view of both the presenter and slides.
Hey, Ross.
Yes.
Ross, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You need to activate the interpretation. Oh. Thank you.
Sorry about that. My apologies, I'm not seeing that. Well, I'll work on that and we'll continue for the moment. Give me one moment. So the Q&A feature is enabled, and we will be asking you to complete several Zoom polls during the presentation, and results will be shared live. A version of the survey with some additional questions and opportunities for longer answers is available on the RCPA website and will be linked on the homepage and is there currently. Thank you again for attending, and without further ado, I'd like to introduce RCPA Executive Director Suzanne Smith.
Good evening. Thank you very much for everyone who has tuned in. It is Earth Week, and with the 53rd annual Earth Day happening this Saturday, this was a great opportunity to gather, and I want to thank you for joining us to talk about the future of local action on climate change. The theme for Earth Day this year is Take Action, Be Part of the Green Revolution. And this evening, the RCPA will share the work that's been happening to identify high priority and high impact local actions that we can take to support a resilient, low carbon, and safe community for everyone. And we'll ask you about what your priorities are as well. In addition to prioritizing local actions this evening, it's also tied to local funding and securing those local funds. One of the most important ways to support local action is to make sure we have a stable, reliable, and flexible local funding to support the work that needs to be done. And there's a lot to do and a short time to do it in. But I'm grateful for your engagement this evening and look forward to the coming months as we continue to broaden the discussion and at the same time, home in on the key actions that we can accomplish locally to make the most difference. To kick things off, I want to acknowledge our chair, Chris Rogers, is here, as well as our vice chair, Linda Hopkins. And I'm honored to introduce our special guest, Congressman Jared Huffman, who is joining us from Washington, D.C., where he's doing the good work of representing the 2nd Congressional District. That's a district that spans the entire north coast of the state of California, from the Golden Gate Bridge to the Oregon border. He was first elected to Congress in November of 2012 and currently serves on the Committee on Natural Resources and the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. During his time in Congress, Mr. Huffman has built a reputation as a progressive leader and an environmental expert who focuses on making a difference. Jared is also committed to ensuring our communities are resilient to the effects of climate change, including wildfires and drought. And he's also working to reduce our unhealthy dependence on fossil fuels. Before serving in Congress, Jared represented the North Bay for 6 years in the California Assembly, where in 2008, he authored the legislation that created the RCPA. So having him here this evening as we talk about the future of climate change efforts in Sonoma County and the role of RCPA, it's with great gratitude that that he saw the value in a collaborative countywide approach to local government and community action on climate change in the early days, back in 2008. We couldn't be more pleased to have had his support then as we do now. And now in his role as a member of Congress, we're excited to hear from him about the work happening in Washington, D.C., and how our local efforts to secure stable funding to fight climate change can leverage resources at the federal level. So welcome, Congressman. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Suzanne, and hello, everyone from Washington, D.C. It is a pleasure to join you this evening, 3 hours into your future. Let me just tell you how proud I am of this Climate Protection Authority. You know, back in my prior job as a state assembly member, I didn't realize that there wasn't the legal authority for a local climate entity like this Climate Protection Authority to exist. We had to create it. That wouldn't have happened, of course, unless Suzanne and other leaders in Sonoma County came to me with this audacious idea of doing something no one else had done. And I was so proud to carry that legislation and so pleased that we got it over the line and it became law. I'm also thrilled at the good work that all of you have been doing ever since. Certainly lots of local climate action, but also setting very important decarbonization goals that are going to see us through the future. This is an important time, and I think it's appropriate that you're taking stock and thinking about ways to secure a long-term stable funding stream for this important work. That seems like the right thing to do right now when I think about everything that we did at the national level in the last Congress, passing really landmark legislation that puts hundreds of billions of dollars on the table for climate action, much of it flowing down through local governments and communities to help us decarbonize. What a perfect time for our local government and community partners to figure out ways to bring some of that, bring our fair share of that federal money back to the North Coast. I want to see that happen. And whatever you decide in terms of securing a long-term stable funding stream for this important work, I do want you to know that you can count on my support. So this is Earth Week, and I think it's also a time that reminds us that when we come together with purpose, we can meet big challenges by doing big things. And I think some of you may be too young to remember what it was like before the first Earth Day. It was pretty bleak. We had entire Great Lakes that were declared dead, devoid of aquatic life. The national bird and other raptors were sort of written off as doomed to extinction because of pollution, DDT, and other things. We had a river in Ohio that caught fire and we couldn't put it out for days. We had the Santa Barbara oil spill and so many almost dystopic environmental disasters. It was bad. And yet from that really dark moment, the first Earth Day came together, an incredible grassroots effort that resulted in more than just a symbolic day where we pause and appreciate the planet. It led to action. It led to really most of our nation's bedrock environmental laws being passed in the early 1970s, back when environmentalism used to be bipartisan. We hope we can get back to that, believe me. But it was really something we needed in the early 1970s, and it's made a huge difference. It's brought back clean water and clean air and other values. It's brought species back from the brink of extinction. And I think it's a great example for us to draw inspiration and purpose from as we think about this current inflection point that we're all troubled by, the climate crisis. We are running out of time to address this existential moment for our planet, for our species, for our future generations. And so that's why we've just all got to pull together and do everything we can. I know I can count on you at the local and community level to not only do the right thing, but to lead, to show communities all over this country how to do the right thing. And I want to support you in every way I can. So whatever you decide going forward for this wonderful climate authority that I'm honored to have had a hand in helping create, just know that you can count on my support. And I'm incredibly grateful for what you do. Thank you for having me this evening.
Thank you very much, Congressman Huffman. We really appreciate you joining us this evening and your leadership on climate and some of the other issues, as well as your support. So thank you again for joining us this evening. Good evening, everyone. My name is Tanya Nara, and I'm the Director of Climate Programs for the RCPA. And I'm going to start off our presentation portion of the meeting. And I see a note that my voice is not sounding very good. Is it better now? Nope. Let's see. How is that? Is that any better? Okay, see heads nodding. All right. So I'm going to start us off with a brief overview of the Climate Protection Initiative, and then I will turn it over to our wonderful committee chairs who will walk you through some of the projects that they have identified with their program committees. So Ross, if you could go to the slide that has the mobilization strategies, please. All right. So the Sonoma Climate Mobilization Strategy was adopted by the RCPA board in March of 2021. This strategy provides a framework for climate action and sets a new goal of achieving carbon neutrality in Sonoma County by 2030. And what this means is that we need to reduce our carbon pollution or greenhouse gas emissions significantly. We estimate at least by 80%, and that any remaining emissions by 2030 are offset by an increase in carbon sequestration, which means pulling carbon from the atmosphere and storing it in our forests, natural and working lands, and our urban green spaces. To achieve our 2030 goal, we identified a number of high impact strategies that you see here on this slide in the areas of buildings, transportation, and land and water. Underlying all of our strategies is our deep commitment to environmental justice and community engagement in developing and implementing climate solutions. Next slide, please. So recognizing that we will need significantly more funding, local funding, to implement these climate solutions, RCPA launched the Climate Protection Initiative in late 2022. We formed the Climate Protection Initiative Committee that you see here on the slide to help engage as many members of our community as possible in identifying local priorities for climate solutions. The three sector-based communities that you see here on the slide, transportation, buildings, and land and water, started their meetings in February and have been meeting monthly since then. If you want to get more involved in a particular area, these meetings are a great way to get connected. We'll share more about how to get involved at the end of tonight's presentation. We're also working with local community-based organizations to help us deepen our integration of environmental justice into the work of the committees. Tonight, you will hear updates from the leads of the three committees: transportation, buildings, and land and water. Next slide, please. The overall program goals that are guiding our work are to reduce carbon pollution as fast as possible, to help our community adapt to the negative impacts of climate change that we're already experiencing here in Sonoma County, such as wildfires, floods, and extreme heat. And finally, we know that we need to take action in ways that benefit all residents in an equitable and efficient way. Next slide, please. So using the Sonoma Climate Mobilization Strategy as our framework, we're identifying potential projects in the areas of buildings, transportation, and land and water. And our program committees have also identified project ideas in the cross-sector areas of equity, workforce training, and public education. Next slide, please. So on this slide, we've listed a few examples of the kinds of cross-sector projects the committees have identified so far, and I'm sure we'll identify many more in the future. In a moment, I will turn the program over to our committee chairs to walk you through the ideas their committees have generated so far. I'd like to emphasize again that we're very early in our process, and there will be many opportunities for additional feedback between now and December when the committees present their final recommendations to our board. The RCPA board has not yet decided on which funding option or options to pursue. It's evaluating options that could be implemented countywide, including a sales tax, parcel tax, or vehicle license fee. Now for each committee, you'll see lists of project examples similar to the list on this slide. And we know that this is a lot to take in and don't expect you to remember all of the ideas that you see tonight. We'll share these slides after the meeting and also provide a link to a full list of the project ideas if you want to review them in more detail. Our goal tonight is to get your initial feedback and reactions to these ideas. We'll share a few Zoom polls during the meeting for this purpose. And then after tonight's meeting, we'll also send out a survey with the Zoom poll questions for additional feedback. Lastly, I'd like to now turn the meeting over to our committee chairs, and I'd like to start by introducing the chairs of our Buildings Committee, Ann Edminster and Panama Bartholomew. I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Tanya, Suzanne, and Congressman Huffman. It's an honor to join you all this evening. So I'm gonna be the main point person for conveying our committee's work so far, but also want to just make sure you have a chance to meet my co-chair, Panama Bartholomew. Say howdy to the folks, Panama.
Howdy, folks.
Very good. All right, so just a quick overview before we launch into sort of where we are with the project and topic ideas, a little bit of background on the committee's work. We started in February, as Tanya mentioned, just with a brainstorm of some of the buildings related projects that would really benefit from additional funding. And those fell under the two broad captions of both mitigation and adaptation. And we also sort of looked at them across a number of different ways of slicing and dicing that residential buildings, commercial buildings, public buildings, as well as infrastructure. We moved on from that in the March committee meeting to, first of all, review the equity toolkit that the county has adopted from the Local and Regional Government Alliance on Race and Equity, and had a conversation about the implications of the building's work for low-income households and renters, and began to talk about the criteria for project evaluation. And it's April, it's this month, our committee meeting this month, we discussed the stakeholders who have been engaged in our conversations so far in the buildings arena, as well as additional stakeholders that we would like to hear from, and that we'll be doing some outreach to make sure that we get a more diverse set of voices involved in this. And then we also reviewed the project ideas that we have brainstormed so far. PC and I in particular spent quite a bit of time looking at those and putting them into various buckets, which you will shortly see. Did a bunch of sort of refining and combining to just really boil this down to what we hope is a fairly comprehensible list. So we'll move into that next. So next slide, please. So the three big buckets we have, you see on the screen. Existing buildings, of course, are a big part of the equation for addressing climate issues in the county. So looking at comprehensive upgrades for them. Also electric vehicle charging infrastructure, which arguably might belong within the purview of the Transportation Committee. So we looked at this primarily through the lens of building related EV infrastructure needs. And then finally, also looking at community scale solutions. In other words, things that transcended the scale of the individual building. And now we'll look at a little more at each of those buckets. So moving on to the next slide. So within the upgrades, comprehensive building upgrades category, 3 buckets again. We're fond of the 3-3-3 approach. So you'll see a lot of that here this evening. The 3 themes that rose to the top in this bucket were what we're referring to as owner ambassador services. So this is not just purely financial assistance, but informational assistance, guidance for folks who will be looking to accomplish comprehensive building upgrades. Secondly, of course, the direct incentive bucket, people, individuals, organizations, governments, businesses will all need some assistance. So what do those types of financial assistance look like, whether it's direct funding, incentives, rebates, or actually financing tools? And then finally, the third theme is additional assistance. So you'll see this over and over again, where we're looking at it and saying, okay, let's not forget the equity component of all this, that our low-income households, renters, and also landlords in many cases may need assistance above and beyond that of the rest of the population. And I won't try and walk you through the list of example projects here. While I'm talking, you see my lips moving, your eyes are no doubt scanning the screen and can review this list here. And I'm sure we can also come back to them when the time is appropriate. And as I think Tanya mentioned, we'll have some polls to get your feedback on some of these. So just a quick scan through. And we can probably move to the next slide now. We're moving at lightning speed here. I hope that's what y'all had in mind. Okay, in the electric vehicle charging infrastructure category, the 3 themes were improving access to affordable charging, and in particular near multifamily housing, because those in single family homes have a much less of a lift, generally speaking, than those in multifamily, which are typically tenant as opposed to privately owned condominiums are the biggest concern. And then the second theme, the idea that we can use vehicles as we see increasing adoption of electric vehicles, there's the opportunity to allow those vehicles to provide backup power for the residences. There's some really interesting emerging possibilities there. And the third theme is looking at low-cost ways of making EV charging more widely available, not just at specific buildings, but in other areas. So, and again, we have a diverse set of options listed here under the example projects. One of the big challenges, just to put a little bit of flesh on this particular bone, the last theme here, is that there is public EV charging infrastructure, but it's at retail rates that make the cost of charging pretty comparable to that of running an internal combustion vehicle. And so that's not going to really help us get over the hurdle of more EV adoption. So we need to really enable people to reap the benefits of charging the vehicle, not just buying them. Running them is probably the bigger issue, since with the federal incentives for vehicle purchase, they're going to become more affordable. Not that that will address every vehicle, but that's another topic. Moving on to the next slide. So our community scale solutions. This is another sort of diverse bucket, 3 themes, community resilience centers. So we've talked about the benefit of having emergency power, backup power, generally run by renewable energy sources in particular places within communities where they are most needed. And we've also talked about the need for backup power at individual buildings, but I think generally our feeling is that it's not going to be financially viable or necessarily even that attractive to have backup power at every single individual residence, that it's a much higher priority to be considering how do we serve the communities as a whole with resilient centers to assist during power outages and extreme weather events and other types of emergencies. And similarly, looking at this not just for these critical facilities, but also just how can we help neighborhoods to have this type of resiliency feature. And then finally, within this community scale solutions, we've also talked about what can we do to help municipalities or the local governments to develop more possibilities within their communities. And one of those ideas is to come up with support for creation of master plans for EV charging. So again, there's crossover. You'll see these are not neatly distinct categories always. There's a bunch of weaving that goes among all of them. And I believe that is it for our quick rundown. Pamela, were there any other things you wanted to call out here in particular?
No, you captured it well.
All right, great. Thank you so much. We'll turn it over to the next group. Or are we doing our poll here?
Yes, we will share a brief poll right now. And we'll give everybody about a minute to do that. And then we can give everyone an opportunity if you'd like to comment briefly on the results of that poll. So poll should be active now.
Great, it is up.
For future meetings, we can perhaps suggest poll music to be played in the background as we wait for the results.
And I do want to reiterate that this poll is available if you don't want to do it under time pressure on the RCPA website on the Climate Protection Initiative page, and that is active now. And those results will be combined with these, so you will be taking part that way as well.
Great, Russ, could you drop that link into the chat perhaps? Thank you.
Okay, and that link is in the chat, although I believe it showed up as a response to a question in the Q&A, just so it's visible to everyone. But again, that is on the RCPA site. And I still see some answers coming in, so I'm going to give it just one more moment. And we'll go ahead and share the results. Is that visible to everyone?
Yes, I think so.
And there is a Spanish version of the poll as well. I know there's Spanish text on the end of this, but on the website.
It looks like answer number 3 was the most popular, with 62% of offering extra assistance for low-income households, renters, and landlords. Kind of equal distribution after that, but good to see there's a high priority project that emerged in that. Thank you.
All right. Any other comments on the results, or should we move on?
Let's move on.
Excuse me, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our next 2 panelists for the Transportation Committee. We have Alexa Forrester and Eris Weaver here with us to share an update on the Transportation Committee. So we'll turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Tanya. You go ahead to the next slide, Ross. Eris Weaver, I'm the Executive Director of the Sonoma County Bicycle Coalition, and my co-lead for this committee is Alexa Forrester. She's on the faculty at Santa Rosa Junior College and one of the movers and shakers behind Bikeable Santa Rosa. I'll do most of the talking and she will pipe in when I invariably leave something out. So as you may or may not know, 60% of our greenhouse gas emissions locally are from the transportation sector. So among the 3 sort of main buckets that we've been talking about as ways to address transportation issues are to make walking and bicycling safer and more convenient. Whenever I talk to people about why they don't bike, being afraid that they're going to get killed on the street is the main barrier they express. That we need transit to be more reliable and more frequent. And the other bucket was to look at other kinds of programs that can help support people making other choices in their transportation. And you may notice we actually don't have electric vehicles on this slide. One of the big conversations that we had about that is we really, there's a lot of emphasis going on right now in funding and promoting electric vehicles, but we need mode shift as well as just fuel shift. If all we did was magically wave a wand and have all the private vehicles on the planet be electric, that's still not going to get us to our GHG reduction goals, because we're still manufacturing vehicles. We're having to mine for lithium for the batteries. There are still other consequences of that. So moving people out of private cars and into other modes of transportation as much as is possible is one of the things that we're really focusing on. Next slide, please. So in talking about bicycling and pedestrian safety and convenience, we need to expand, improve, and build more sidewalks, more protected bike paths. We need to connect all the destinations where people are and where they want to go in a network. Too frequently we have bike lanes or things that stop and start, and then how are you supposed to navigate the gap that's in there? More protected bike lanes and separated bike lanes so that people feel safe and are more likely to choose cycling. Maintenance, ongoing maintenance is another thing that we need to do. There are a lot of bike paths out there that are in really bad condition, which makes them hard to do. We need more bicycle parking. That's another barrier to folks bicycling more. You can't easily go do your shopping and other errands if there isn't a safe place to secure your bike. There's also other projects that can calm and slow traffic, vehicular traffic, in ways that make it safer to cycle. Speed tables, curb bump outs, and other things that will help both pedestrians and cyclists navigate in a safer way. Next slide, please. That's an example of a protected bike lane there with a barrier between the bike lane and the parked cars. So the parked cars are protecting the cyclists from the moving cars. Next slide, please. And again, a speeds table, another way that will slow down traffic. And again, also those bump outs there, that you see that has narrowed the amount of space that the amount of territory that the pedestrians crossing the street have to walk, which also makes it safer for the pedestrians. Next slide. Next, there's public transit. What are the barriers for people to take bus or train or other kinds of transit more frequently? Well, if it doesn't go where I need to go, when I need to get there, I can't take it. So expanding hours of service, increasing the frequency, changing routes. I've also heard people say that, oh, it's expensive. So can we reduce fares or restructure how we do fares? What are other things we can do to make taking the bus or the train more comfortable and more appealing, whether it's Wi-Fi or more comfortable seats or other things that can be done. School buses are also on there. Actually, the safest way for kids to get to school is on a school bus. There are fewer injuries and fatalities for kids on their way to school in a school bus than there are in any other way. Next slide, please. So some other things that one can do in order to improve transit are make separate lanes for buses. Another barrier to people taking buses more frequently is, oh, it's so slow. And that's true. I can actually ride my bike from Cotati to Santa Rosa faster than I can take the bus. So making dedicated lanes for the buses, as on the left, where there's a red lane just for buses so they can move faster than other traffic. And there are other kind of dedicated ways like that to make transit faster and more convenient. Next slide. There's also on-demand transit, and I was just in a meeting that SMART is getting ready to implement a pilot of something similar like this between the Santa Rosa Airport and the airport train station, which is microtransit that it will operate with an app similar to what you do with Lyft or Uber and be able to get from the train to the airport or other businesses around that area. So not all transit has to be a big bus that follows a set route all the time. There are other kinds of models that we can explore. Next slide. And then there is, again, making it pleasanter to take the bus, letting you know when the bus is coming, like with the automated signs, better bus shelters, more comfortable and friendly buses. Next slide. Then there are other projects to just help encourage people to try and use these other methods. Expanding bike and scooter sharing. Right now, we do have a few cities in the county that have one or the other, which is great for tourists and visitors, right? Get off the train, get off the bus, get on a scooter or a bike. That helps people get around. What kind of employer-based commuter programs can help people get around without having to use a vehicle? And then offering more incentives for e-bikes. There's some interesting research that says that actually you get more GHG reduction per dollar spent by subsidizing e-bikes than you do by subsidizing electric cars. Because again, that gets at the mode shift. The bikes are obviously less expensive than a vehicle. And since a vast majority of people's trips are just within like 2 to 5 miles, which is a perfect distance for doing on a bicycle, especially with an e-bike. Next slide, I think, yeah. So here are some examples of the scooters and the bikes. Next slide. More e-bike incentives. Oh, and that's a cargo bike. That there's this whole explosion in different types of bikes out there. And if you've never tried out a cargo bike, check with me at the Bike Coalition. We have some that people can try out. Next slide. Okay, before we go to the survey, let me check in with Alexa and see, is there anything that I missed or anything that you want to add?
Yeah, thanks so much, Eris, for doing the lion's share of talking. Hi, everybody. I'm Alexa. And I just wanted to chime in. Kevin Christensen had asked an important question in the Q&A about ag logistic transportation, commercial and industrial uses. And when we look at the 60% of transportation, related carbon emissions, some of those are harder to get at than others. Obviously, airline travel and heavy commercial and industrial uses we're just like not as far along as decarbonizing or potential for decarbonizing. So what we're really focusing on is how can we give people who are ready to try other modes of transportation other than single-user gas-powered vehicles options for getting out. That's where we think we can make the most progress in the short term, in terms of the fact that there are right now, at least in our work that we've done with people in the community, when you ask people why they choose to drive it, their answer is they don't have any realistic other option. And it's either because the transit isn't frequent enough to meet their needs, or doesn't go where they need it to go, or they don't feel safe on their bike and they don't know how to do that. So we're really interested in creating more options for residents, essentially using this as an opportunity to really give people as many options as possible for using low carbon transportation. There are some developments in commercial, industrial, and ag that I was excited by that suggestion, because that's a place that we can look, and we'll definitely take that feedback as well. Electrifying farm vehicles, there are some electric trucks, transport trucks coming online and so forth, but we haven't dug in as deep as those. I don't know if you want to add anything on that point. But yeah, we're excited to hear your feedback, both on the survey and in the survey that was posted in the Q&A. And, just if you, want to send us emails too, we'd be happy to hear from you.
Thanks. One other thing I want to mention is I know earlier Anne was saying, oh, we're really whizzing through and we are so ahead of schedule. And I actually am very happy about that, because that means we will have more time at the end to hear from looks like about 100 people who are listening in. So let's move on to the next survey.
Okay, and we'll give folks just a little bit more just to complete this. And again, my broken record reminder is that we do have the full survey on the RCPA Climate Protection Initiative site with space for longer answers as well. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share the results so far. Looks like we do have some clear favorites. Feel free to weigh in, panelists, on if you have opinions.
Yeah, I'm of course I'm happy to see 74% on improving and expanding bikeways and walkways, and then extending hours and transit and increased frequency. Those are very clearly ahead.
I also just wanted to say we're reading the questions and answers that are coming in because we're on a tight time frame. We're not going to respond to all of them, but those are definitely being processed, and we're taking those all on board.
Okay, are we ready to move on to the next committee?
Looks like we are. So thank you, Eris and Alexa, and thanks to everyone who completed the poll. So now I would like to introduce the chair of our third and final committee, the Land and Water Committee. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Carol Hart.
Hi, everybody. Wow, these have been really inspiring presentations, and I love biking, so I loved hearing about that. And, you know, we have a lot of challenges as the former parks director, and, you know, we have a lot of challenges with our bike trails and our bike throughout the county, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't address them and overcome them. And it's just really inspiring to hear your presentation. So I'm going to just give kind of a little brief overview of the land and water topic before we go into the specifics. We all know that climate change is a huge challenge facing us, and it's a global problem, but we have to act locally. And one of the best things that we can do, in my opinion, is preserving natural areas and implementing regenerative agricultural practices. Natural ecosystems like forest, grasslands, wetlands, and oceans all play a crucial role in sequestering carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, helping to mitigate climate change. When forests are preserved, they continue to absorb and store carbon, and they reduce global warming. For example, carbon sequestration occurs very efficiently in trees, particularly those that live a long time, like coastal redwood trees. Redwoods have been touted and are a particularly effective method of sequestering carbon because they grow very tall and very quickly. According to a recent report by Save the Redwoods League, old growth redwoods can each store between 2,000 to 3,000 tons of carbon per acre, which is significantly higher than any other forest type in the world. Moreover, these forests continue to absorb carbon as they age, with an estimated 20% of the total carbon stored in old growth redwoods sequestered after they are 50 years old, so as they continue to grow into old age. Wetlands, which we also have significant number of acres in Sonoma County, also store a lot of carbon in soil and vegetation. One study found they can sequester up to 45 metric tons of carbon per acre in some regions. Another area that a lot of people don't think about, but is very important, is soil carbon sequestration. It's a process that involves storing carbon in the soil and thereby removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and mitigating the effects of climate change. This occurs when plants photosynthesize, they take in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and they use it to build organic matter in the soil. Here in Sonoma County, we have a diverse range of soil types that are capable of storing a large amount of carbon. These soils are predominantly rich in organic matter, which really helps them sequester carbon, and that's particularly true in our volcanic soils, which a lot of people don't think about. They have a very high capacity for carbon storage, but they have to be protected, and they have to be, once you build on top of them, you no longer have that benefit. There's also a lot of land use practices like cover cropping, crop rotation, and no-till farming that can help promote soil carbon accumulation. Cover cropping, which involves planting a crop in between seasons to protect the soil and improves its fertility, has been shown to increase soil carbon by up to 10% in some cases. Crop rotation, which involves alternating the types of crops grown in a given area, can promote soil growth, soil health, and improve carbon storage. No-till farming, which involves leaving the soil undisturbed after harvest, has been shown to promote carbon accumulation as well. Sonoma County has a lot of opportunity to implement these methods of carbon sequestration because of our diverse agricultural community and our incredible redwood forests and other forest land. We have a large variety of crops. Implementing the right land management practices by providing funding directed to it could be highly effective in enhancing carbon storage in soils and mitigating the effects of climate change. So in conclusion, preserving natural ecosystems and implementing regenerative ag can play an enormous role in mitigating climate change. And by recognizing the importance of these strategies and supporting their implementation, we can reduce the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. Saying that, and we'll get into the priorities that have been discussed in our committee, which is quite a large committee and wonderful participation from diverse perspectives. You'll see that one of the great benefits of addressing carbon sequestration is the co-benefits. When you protect land, for example, in a park, you provide a bunch of other benefits that address, people's need to get out and exercise and, be exposed to nature. The impacts of climate change are going to cause people to want to get into cooler places. So if you protect land in parks, for example, that have pools, ponds, lakes, swimming areas, that really helps and is an environmental justice benefit. So let's move on to topic A, which is increased sequestration and enhanced climate resilience. I've already described most of these examples in what I just said in my introductory statement. I'm just looking over here, sorry, at my notes. We can move. So there's 3 topics: sequester carbon and enhance climate resilience, reduce GHG emissions, which is hand in hand with sequestering carbon, preserving ecosystem function. And then the 3rd topic is water-related climate adaptation. So when you're talking about land and water, climate mitigation, which is the absorption of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, and adaptation, which is becoming more resilient to the impacts of climate change and protecting our community from the impacts of climate change, go hand in hand. And that's one of the benefits of integrating land and water solutions. So let's move on to the next slide. So here we have the different themes and examples of the different projects that we've talked about. One of the big impacts of climate change is reduction in biodiversity. I doubt there's one person that is on this Zoom that is here today that doesn't know biodiversity internationally is suffering tremendously. There's reports coming out on a regular basis about the impacts of climate change on species throughout the world, and that's certainly true in Sonoma County. Whether you're talking about something that you don't normally think about, perhaps like bees, impacts on biodiversity and species have huge impacts on us and our future here in this county and beyond. I just talked about regenerative ag. I think that's something that's a tremendous opportunity for us. climate resilient forest conservation, particularly in our redwood forests, can be have a big impact. We just got done and are continuing to do spend money on vegetation management, forest management, to make sure that our forests are protected from extreme wildfire events. That's something that needs a lot of funding and can be very effective in terms of maintaining healthy forests. So that's part of what we're recommending here. We'll talk about reducing wildfire risks, stabilizing land, also increase planting of trees in cities. So urban greening. And that's particularly true in areas of, if you think about Santa Rosa, there's huge swaths of Santa Rosa that are, you really don't even see a tree. Santa Rosa Avenue, for example. I mean, these are areas that could really benefit, not only just in terms of carbon sequestration, but in the cooling effect that planting trees, urban forests can have. And that's true also of green roofs and other type of approaches in developed areas. Also, the creation of parks and cool spaces within cities and around them. We also talked in our committee about reducing food waste, which can have a big benefit. All right, do we have another? There we go. All right, so here we're talking about reducing greenhouse gases and preserving ecosystem function, because that, of course, is heavily impacted by climate change. So again, we're talking about advancement of climate resilient and regenerative ag practices on all of the varied croplands in this county that I discussed in my introductory statement, resilient rangeland management, grazing exclusions, particularly moving cattle in a way that allows recovery of rangelands so that they can sequester more carbon, erosion control. The investment in resilient buffer zones within and around developed areas really can make a big difference. For one thing, allowing people to escape from heat islands that are created within urban areas, and also providing benefits for species and increasing biodiversity, all of the things that are stated in this under this heading. All right, why don't we move to the third, which is water. So this is really from our water, Sonoma County Water, talking about the importance of this is really relates to adaptation. So making sure that our water supply infrastructure is protected, making sure that water management, these are all pretty straightforward, making sure that our water supply and treatment is resilient, that we address flood management, and that we protect our watersheds, particularly headwaters, very important. So we do have a tax-based ag and open space district whose mission is to acquire land primarily through the use of conservation easements. That is an essential partner to this effort and would go hand in hand. This effort would primarily be based on land management, healthy forests, water-related climate adaptation that you're seeing here. And then, you have the benefit of the acquisition entity. So I see this as a perfect partnership, and I think that our committee agrees. So in essence, those are, some of the key benefits from the Land and Water Group. And I guess we also do have public education, workforce training, and social equity. And the next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so that's a separate section. Okay, so these are our survey questions, and I think we're ready to go ahead with that. Great. All right, it sounds like I'm the only one talking, so I guess we'll go ahead and start the survey. Tanya?
Yes, the survey should be up, I think.
Okay, great.
Yeah, it should be visible.
Yeah.
Hopefully, when people go to the RCPA website and fill out the longer survey with the opportunity for longer questions, they can also suggest the hold music for the polls as well for next meeting.
I'll add that question, Panama, definitely.
Are you about ready?
We're at about 73%. I just want to give it just 30 more seconds here. I know it's an awkward silence, but I just want to make sure people have a chance to get their answers in. So just a few more seconds and I will share those results.
I think an awkward silence on Zoom is somehow not that bad though. Awkward silence in your house. Doesn't.
Okay, those results should be visible.
Ross, do you see that the interpreter has her hand up?
I do, thank you.
Okay. This is really interesting, I have to say. I'm a little surprised and I'm really happy to see that regenerative ag is getting a lot of support from folks. And climate resilient forest conservation restoration. Those really are the two big impact things that we could do in the land and water area. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Carol, and thank you to all of our committee leads for sharing your project ideas and lists with us. We really appreciate you being here this evening. I'd like to turn it over to Ross for a few next steps and ways that everyone can get involved. And then it looks like we will have a little bit of time left for Q&A. And so we are going to go through some of the questions that have been posed in the Q&A and invite our panelists or our chairs to respond to as many as we're able to get to this evening. So Ross, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Tanya. So in terms of next steps, the next steps of this process will be presenting the draft projects list and public feedback at the May 8th RCPA SCTA board meeting. The RCPA board members will provide a recommendation on a contract to conduct public polling in June. Based on this feedback, we'll work with the program committees to refine the recommendations. The final recommendations will go to the RCPA board in December. And there are several ways that you can get involved in the process yourself. Thank you again for attending this meeting. If you want to get a little more into the process of coming up with these recommendations, the Climate Protection Initiative program committees meet monthly, and we encourage you to attend the committee that interests you most, be it buildings, transportation, or land and water. Information on these meetings is available on the RCPA website under What We Do, Climate Protection Initiative. RCPA also hosts quarterly Climate Action Advisory Committee meetings that we encourage you to attend, and also invite you to subscribe to RCPA newsletters and follow us on social media. And at this point, we're going to see if the panelists are available to answer a few select questions from the Q&A. So I will turn it over and see what they have. And again, QR code this time, but this will also take you to the RCPA Climate Protection Initiative page, where you can sign up for committees and also look at past meeting agendas, recordings, and that's where this recording will be put late tonight when Zoom spits it out. So thank you very much, and let me turn it over to our panelists.
So Ross, I see a couple of questions that maybe we could. One is related to urban forestry as an emphasized or delineated category. I think this is an important aspect to consider. So Carol, do you want to speak to the urban forestry idea?
Sure. I mean, one of the exciting things about urban forestry is it's actually a category that the state has identified for potential funding. It's in their as an offset, as a climate offset. So it's something that we could be, one of the things with this measure is to use it to leverage state and federal money. That's the sort of big bonus opportunity here. And that's really true with land and water. So, like I said earlier, I think a lot about Santa Rosa Avenue, and a lot of us go there for, various things. And every time I go there, I think, wow, what an opportunity to really, plant trees in this whole area, and what a transformation that would be for people that live there and people that go there. And that's true really all over the county. So I think there's funding for it. I think it's a tremendous opportunity. And I think that everyone that's watching here and involved with this measure should recognize that we could leverage this funding and really get big bang for our buck when it comes to urban forestry, green roofs, and transform our cities in a way that would really make a big difference.
I would love to tack on to what Carol just said, is that I think that also involves an equity issue, right? I saw a wonderful piece looking at one street in Los Angeles that, as it went from the richest neighborhood to the poorest neighborhood, went from lush greenery to just concrete. And similarly with transportation, I think all of the issues that all of us have talked about have more impact, right? So for example, lower income folks, and often neighborhoods that are mostly people of color, may have a higher percentage of people who can't afford a car, right? And so need good public transit, need good infrastructure. And then they also have the worst infrastructure. They have the worst streets, they have the least bike facilities, and don't necessarily have as good of public transportation.
All right. There was also a question related to, I'm going to say shared mobility, or so whether it's shared scooters or bike share or even car share. And I'm wondering if Alexa or Eris, you might want to speak to how that topic has come up in your conversations.
In respect, so we've considered various car sharing options, particularly there's some models out of like LA of small, like banks of small electric vehicles that would be available for use on an hourly or daily basis for community that need them, like in car share programs. And that's something that's still very much on the table. It often would need to be coordinated with buildings to make sure that there were places for those cars and charging available for those cars. And then there's also equity questions to be answered about that, who has access to them, and is priority given to certain neighborhood residents and so forth. So those are discussions that are ongoing. And if people, you know, really like that idea, letting us know would be very helpful. Yeah. And I also want to address, I think Chris Thomas maybe and some other people have been asked about like tracking and sort of data. Our ultimate goal is to make sure that we have a really clear understanding of how much of each of these programs might cost to implement and how much greenhouse gas reduction and sort of equity impacts, you know, for each of them. We're still in the process of doing that, but for sure we are looking at available research on that.
I'm going to switch over to a building/energy question that just popped up. How come we don't see more solar panels on business parking lots, similar to what Kaiser has implemented? Panama, do you have any thoughts on solar and commercial properties? Is that something we should be exploring, or how does that help the grid?
Sure. Thank you for that. I think, you know, I'm always amazed actually driving around Sonoma County, just the proliferation of solar in this county and the leadership of property owners here and how much we see compared to other areas. But you're right, you know, we have seen some really innovative policies of late. You know, France just required that every major parking lot install solar over their parking lots over the next 5 years. And I think that here in Sonoma County, it could provide some real resilience benefits. You know, if we had large areas like that are dedicated to just leaving cars or just empty quite often, if we could be using those spaces for solar panels and be able to use those to help in times of high peak loads, like in the summer when all of our air conditioning is running at full steam, it could be a real benefit. It could also be a real benefit for electric vehicle charging as well, if paired with some storage. So I think some funding coming from an initiative like this could provide just that little bit of difference in order to being able to make some of those projects pencil out economically and provide a real resilience benefit for the community.
Just piggyback on that too. I think that the notion of having it tied to EV charging is really important, because right now, probably many of you heard about the debt curve, or the fact that California has more excess solar production than it can use during the daytime hours. So mostly those parking facilities are used in the daytime. And so if they are coupled with storage, that's really, really valuable. I've also noticed how when I park within a covered area, how much it reduces my reliance in the vehicle on air conditioning. So there's an ancillary benefit there of reducing the air conditioning loads in the vehicles.
Maybe along that line, what opportunities might be available to mitigate short-lived climate pollutants like HFCs through this funding effort? Any thoughts on that? Let me start by saying I'll jump in with an idea or thought. The idea of the RCPA and a local action sort of oriented measure or effort is what can we do locally? So sometimes those larger pollutant issues are better handled through a regulatory framework at the state or federal level. But there's also opportunity to incentivize behaviors and incentivize changes in practice. What do you all think about that, especially in the building front?
Yeah, this funding can be a very big help. The federal government last year passed regulations on HFCs, but we still have a lot farther to go. And the good news is that the technologies are available to be significantly reducing the greenhouse gas impact of escaped refrigerants. The challenge is that quite often they're newer to the market. And so it can use a little extra money in order to be able to make that pencil out for, in particular, small commercial groceries in Sonoma County and other refrigeration operations. And so having some funding available from a funding source like this could make all the difference from some of our local small businesses being able to make that transition.
All right. I just want to acknowledge all of the questions and comments we received in the Q&A. Some of them were really specific. We appreciate that. We're going to go through the questions. We tried to answer some in writing throughout the presentation and then some here at the end. We'll also insert them into a document that we can put on our website so that the content can be available for future reference as well. Just to close out here a little bit, there was a question about local grocery stores. I don't know that it's a question. It sounds more like a comment related to local grocery stores. But what it brings to mind for me is land use practices and how that affects transportation, how it affects buildings, and how it affects land and water. And so that land use activity that is really rooted in local government is something that helps link all of the topics I think we've talked about tonight and this climate measure. And it's where our greatest authority lies here locally, whether it's Supervisor Hopkins, who's our vice chair, or Councilmember Rogers, who's our chair here at RCPA. They bring that land use perspective to these discussions as well. So the issues of grocery stores, being able to shop locally, all of that, it's really a critical part of the discussion as well. So thank you, Andy, for putting that in there as well. I did mention my chair and vice chair a couple times. I want to see if they want to just give a shout out or anything here as we wrap up. I think we've covered a lot of the questions. I want to thank the panelists and see if my chair or vice chair have any closing comments.
Yeah, do you want to say a few words, Linda? I just want to say thank you. One of the things that we have really valued all the way through this process so far was that this is a community-driven initiative. It is folks who love Sonoma County and live here who are helping to drive the conversations around how to create a more sustainable future for all of our kids and our families. And ultimately, it's going to be up to this community whether or not they see value in what we're proposing, whether the things that we are showing them they need to do to reach carbon neutrality is worth it to them. And that's going to take all of us working together to talk about the benefits. It's going to take all of us talking about the vision. And then if this does become a ballot measure, it's going to take all of us going door to door to make sure that we sell it to the public and make sure that they understand the benefits. For now, I just want to say a huge thank you to everybody who's participating. It is a lot of work. Thank you to our chairs. I know you all care deeply about it. And thank you to our RCPA staff who have been shouldering the load for us as well. I'll kick it back over to you, Linda.
Thank you so much. And, I just want to say I appreciate some of the comments that we're talking about policy in addition to the funding initiative. And I want to be clear that this is not a problem that can be solved only by throwing money at it. And so I do think that we also need to take bold leadership and bold actions. And I believe that the folks who serve on the RCPA board are willing to take policy suggestions back to their respective councils and, of course, the Board of Supervisors to consider taking further action. I think I'm guessing that we are the only county in the United States that has as many cities who have banned gas stations as we have. And, you know, the county took that step as well. So we are committed to taking those steps in order to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, leveraging not only hopefully a funding initiative, but also policy. And just want to say thank you so much, Chair Rogers, for your leadership, Suzanne, for your fantastic leadership, and Tanya and Ross, the fantastic team. And then I was so impressed by the level of detail that our committees got into. Sometimes I feel like, you know, government, we sort of soar too high and it's too vague and too squishy. This is not that. We really are actually putting forward substantive proposals and appreciate the fantastic feedback from the community this evening. Look forward to digging into all of those questions. Thank you all so much.
Well, Tanya and Ross, I think we will close it out then, and thank everyone for being here. There is more to come for sure over the next year as we work through the rest of this process. And just express my gratitude to the team and everyone for being here this evening. Thanks.
Happy Earth Day, everybody.
Thanks to everybody who came.
Yes, very much so.